Fighting to be British. The government claims it has acted to end the Windrush scandal, but tonight our guests reveal the true depth of Britain's hostile environment towards immigrants. Good evening. You might think the government's spectacular U-turn yesterday on the Windrush Generation has solved the problem. They will now be able to get British passports free. It should never have happened, said the Home Secretary, as she finally promised to fix it. But why did she suddenly change her mind after months and years of ignoring the outrage? And is Windrush a unique mistake caused by officials, or was it the policy, the political atmosphere, a toxic, racist undercurrent driven by public alarm over immigration? And has the government actually solved the problem, or are there many scandals unfixed? Tonight, we have gathered those directly affected, some terribly so. We've put them together with politicians, leading thinkers, and cultural commentators. What does it say about us, this Britain?
Also tonight, President Macron becomes the first world leader to have a state visit to President Trump's White House.
I'll get that little piece of dandruff off.
Amid the bonhomie, can an unlikely bromance between these two lead the world toward peace? And claim and counterclaim in the Cambridge Analytica data scandal as the company hires a PR man to do the talking.
We are holding our debate here in the Emmanuel Centre in the heart of Westminster. It's been the scene of many civic and political meetings, but we're here also because we hoped it meant that government ministers would find it easy to join us. In fact, we are literally across the road from the Home Office, the government department, at the centre of this whole scandal. But the government has said it will not be joining us tonight. However, if there are ministers or others in that building over there who would like to cross the road and join our debate, the invitation is still open. So how did we get here? Let's look at some of the most striking images from this scandal unfolding.
London is the place for me. London, this lovely city.
We are human beings.
You can go to France or America.
I would not accept myself as a foreigner. I'm not a foreigner. This is my home.
I am glad to know my mother country.
It is hard to keep your mind. It would have been easier if I'd done something.
I still feel hurt. You know, the pain is not going to go away with a sorry.
It's like they want to get rid of me. And I'm not here illegally, you know what I mean?
It's gone. I was going to miss my daughter's wedding, but what can I do? I couldn't do nothing. I just had to accept it.
These people worked here for decades. They paid their taxes, enriched our culture. They are British in all but legal status, and this should never have been allowed to happen.
Well, we will be live streaming tonight's debate. Please go to our website, channel4.com/news, and on social media, please use the hashtag #FightingToBeBritish. But let's get some opening thoughts tonight, just 24 hours, really, after the Home Secretary said she had acted to solve this. Joseph Bravo, let me come to you, because you were one of the first cases to get really major attention in the media. How do you feel tonight? Do you feel that your insecurity has been solved?
No, not really. As this thing has been going on for about a week now, and yet no one's really contacted me. The only thing I've been given been given a contact number and a to go on the computer.
A case number.
Email address. That's all I've been given. So now it's still up to me. I've got to fight my own case still.
So you still don't know whether you'll get...
All I know, I've heard on the radio, and that's it. But does that apply to me? Does that apply to everybody here? I have no idea.
Nadine Robinson, let me come to you. Just tell us what situation you're still in.
Well, I'm advocating for my brother Joe, and I've been the main person trying to sort of resolve this since 2009. And although they're saying they're recognising it now, I think they've known all along. You know, it's their government, they know all the movements, and to sort of minimise it to just saying it's an administration error. You know, these are human beings. How can that be an error?
What did you think when you saw the news yesterday and you saw the Home Secretary saying this was a scandal that should never have happened?
Well, I think that it's just because it's been exposed. It's always been a scandal. And so I don't believe in any of that. It's just because they've been put to shame, and the whole country, and not just here. We've had comments from coming straight from Jamaica that it's worldwide news now. So they just want to rectify it. And
David Lammy, you've probably done more than any other politician to put this on the agenda nationally. Is this solved? Have they done it?
No, it's not solved. It can't be solved because there are many other people beyond Caribbean people caught up in this nightmare who are part of a greater Commonwealth. There is still the whole business of how you repair the damage done to people's lives. How do you compensate for the huge emotional losses and travesties? And actually, in the end, this also leads to a much bigger discussion about a hostile environment in which you ask teachers, doctors, landlords to become the new border guards in our country and police people out of their own life. That's a bigger question that still has to be answered.
OK, well, let's start to unpack this a little bit, because it's not just the older immigrants from the Caribbean who have been caught up in this Windrush scandal. Some of their children and grandchildren have found themselves denied British citizenship too. In a different context, of course, Theresa May once lambasted people she called the citizens of nowhere. But has she, in effect, created such citizens of nowhere through her hostile environment policy? Our senior Home Affairs correspondent, Simon Israel, reports.
This was the British passport issued in St Lucia to Helen Joseph. She was 8 years old when she arrived in the UK as one of the Windrush children.
So you came over here in 67?
So I remember vaguely that, I remember the journey. I think we took part plane and part boat on the River Thames. But it was scary though, it was really scary.
Helen is very likely one of those cases which may qualify for the Home Secretary's promise of citizenship without cost. But what about her British-born daughters? They too have been told, in the past, they don't qualify either.
I'm a student in Reading University. I mean, I also have my national insurance number, I have a job, so it all points towards me being a British citizen, but they tell me that I'm not allowed to claim that nationality.
Okay. And do you feel British?
I do feel British because I was born here, but at the same time I don't, because when I'm told I can't get a British passport, even though I'm British, I do feel like it is upsetting in a way.
They became citizens of nowhere in 2006 when they planned a trip to the Caribbean island to see relatives.
As a family, we were all supposed to go back there in the summer, in July. And so my mum tried to get passports for me and for herself as well, because this one she has now obviously would have expired by then. And that was when they kind of flagged us up and said that Nadine was never originally supposed to get a passport because my mum is not a British citizen, so therefore we're not British citizens.
Nadine's passport, issued for an earlier trip, was confiscated, and she was told it was illegal to have it.
Has either of you been given a reason why you can't?
They always said it was because our mother's nationality was not British. So they
But your
said,
mother arrived on a British passport from St Lucia?
Yeah, she did, yeah.
As part of the Windrush Generations, wasn't she? So how can that be?
I have no idea. They never really explained it to us, really. They just said to us that we're going to give you indefinite settlement here, but we're not really going to... They didn't help us, really. They gave us the visa and they just left us alone, basically. That's all they did. Before they gave us the visas, when my mum tried to fight them on it, they threatened to deport us.
Did they?
Yeah, it was quite scary, I've been told, because this was the time in 2006 when they took Nadine's passport, that my mum was trying to obviously ask them why this is happening, and that was when she just found out that after all this time she's been here, they've never even seen her as a British citizen, so it was a shock to her, and it was upsetting, and the whole family was worried that we were going to get sent away.
That fear has remained ever since. They have no nationality. They have avoided immigration partly because they can't afford the fees, running into thousands of pounds to be recognised as British, and partly the risk, however small, of being forced to leave.
I'm hoping that now it will be recognised that we need help. So if we get the help that we need, then hopefully we can do it the right way. Because it's not that we haven't been told ways that we can get passports, we have. But it's just the fact that these are all ways that we shouldn't have to do because we were born here already.
In a way, it's kind of hurtful because it makes you feel like you don't really belong anywhere.
And that's the question, not for the Windrush children, but for the generations that have followed in a country they feel they are not allowed to claim as their own.
Well, the Home Office told us tonight that the girl's mother seen in that report, Helen Joseph, is not the subject of any enforcement action, and they're urging anybody who requires documentation to contact the dedicated helpline. Ken Moore, you came to this country decades ago. You served in the armed forces.
Yes, I did. Yeah.
What do you think, watching that report, the children and grandchildren still affected?
I think it's a shame, absolutely a shame, because they didn't born anywhere else apart from Britain. So why shouldn't they have a British passport? Why shouldn't they be British? If you look at various situations where other people who born in this country get British passport, i.e., they are not black. So because of that, that's pure racism as far as I'm concerned.
Morva Dorman, sitting next to you. Your family is in a very similar situation.
Yes, we are.
Your own son is effectively stateless.
Yeah.
Just explain that.
In 2008, we were asked to leave. I was given 13 days to say when I was able to pay my fare to go back, or else we will be deported. When I get to Jamaica, I was there for more than 7 hours because they wouldn't let me and my son in the country.
So Jamaica doesn't see your son as Jamaican, and Britain doesn't see him as British.
No.
So he can't travel, he hasn't got a passport.
So he was there, he was there until he was 5. We went there when he was 3. He has not been registered as going to school because he was not allowed to be registered to go to school.
And people will be looking at you and saying, well, you're not Windrush Generation, but your husband, who sadly is too ill to be with us tonight, he came and also served in the armed forces.
Yes, he did.
Jacob Rees-Mogg, when you hear these stories, do you feel a burning injustice?
Oh, it's shameful. I think there is a great equality of Britishness. My family's lived in Somerset for the best part of 1,000 years, but that doesn't make me any more British than somebody who came over on the Windrush. We are all equally British, and we should all be treated in an equal way when we deal with institutions, with the state, and that our children should be treated equally and their Britishness should be recognised, and that the state has done this, that the Home Office have done this, is something we should all be deeply ashamed of. It is terrible, and in my own constituency, the first person who came to see me about this issue was actually from Australia.
When was that?
This was about a couple of years ago.
Right.
So it is a problem that is wider than simply...
So you've known about this for 2 years?
I have known that this was an issue.
How many speeches have you given about it?
I haven't, because I only had one person come to me. I didn't know that it was a more widespread issue. I thought it was a one-off, that somebody who'd come here in 1964 wasn't able to prove a continuity of residence, and that was an issue where I tried to help my constituent. But North East Somerset is not a constituency that has a high level of immigration issues.
David Lammy, every MP must have had these cases coming through their doors at some point.
Well, they're all coming out now. The truth is, a lot of people go underground. They go underground because they're scared of being deported. They go quiet because they're embarrassed that they haven't got a passport. And people are working people and haven't got a lot of money. So for those reasons, they don't all contact MPs. And I've had 9 cases this morning. The truth is now coming out about how people have been treated.
The question is, though, is it solved? You know, has the government solved this? Herbie Providence, do you feel that the government has solved this?
Well, not really, because going from my own experience, which dates back since the 1960s, of course, I came here on a British passport. After a year's working I sought a better life for myself and joined the forces, the British Army. I served in the army throughout theatres in Europe, Middle East, Northern Ireland, etc. And coming towards the end of my service, I thought, well, this is time to make a move to secure more residency in this country. I then tried to apply for a passport, British passport, and was told, well, that's not the case. I have to first get a certificate of residency, and I will have to pay for it. Now that really got up my nose, and I didn't intend to pay whatsoever. I made a fuss, I absolutely refused, but in the end, I had to, with a promise that the money would be refunded to me. I cannot remember if it has been. It's been such a long time ago, but I am sure it didn't.
So you served where, in Northern Ireland?
I served in Northern Ireland, yes, a few times.
Where else? Where else did you serve?
In the Middle East, Germany and Sharjah, again, further down in the Middle East, that sort of thing.
So what did it do to your sense of Britishness that you were being challenged in this way?
Well, it made me feel unwanted. I didn't know where I belonged. I came from St. Vincent, the British colony. I arrived here being British, and then suddenly it seemed like I didn't belong.
And when you hear the Prime Minister apologise, and the Home Secretary apologise, and Jacob Rees-Mogg saying this should never have happened, do you think they get it?
Well, I share what Rees-Mogg has said. It's a little too late. This thing has been going on for quite some time. What has forced them now to make that apology? What had forced them now to do a U-turn? These are some of the answers I would like to get even here this evening.
Jacob Rees-Mogg, can you respond to that?
The reason there has been an apology and a U-turn is thanks to programmes like this that have exposed it. And the British people, I think, are as shocked as everybody here is about this having happened. It is such a deep disgrace. An apology is a beginning of a solution, but it has to be solved in such a way as that people entitled to British passports get them with the normal passport application fee, not with the requirement to produce endless evidence when they've lived here for 50 years.
But you're talking as this has really taken you by surprise. You had no idea that this could happen.
I knew
Despite having a hostile environment
I knew
towards
of it
immigration.
as a one-off with a constituent who had come to see me, but no, I had no idea. I'm not part of the Home Office, and I'm not here representing the government. I'm a backbench member of Parliament, and I think it is of crucial importance that the government deals with this as quickly as possible. But I would add that this is a problem that goes back a long way, that some of the cases we've discussed already, Nadine, you mentioned, goes back to 2009. This is not a Conservative or a Labour problem. It is a problem that has beset British administration, and that makes it all the more urgent to put it right now.
Fiona Compton, let me bring in you for just behind Jacob Rees-Mogg. Where do you think this problem came from?
I just think that it's just this whole thing is a reflection of how we are valued as immigrants. Because, you know, the thing is that I just feel that it's constantly reinforced that we're not valued in this country and that we are not British, even though people who came from the West Indies, especially during the period of the Windrush, grew up as British. We looked up to the Queen. We knew our schooling, everything was British. So I just feel like we come here and it's a big slap in the face once again in 2018. Valued.
Are you shocked?
I'm hurt. I'm hurt. You know, the thing is like racism is such an undertone and people like to swipe it under the carpet, but it's hurtful. It's just hurtful, and I'm happy that it's come out in the open, but I'm not surprised.
David Lammy, Amber Rudd said this was a line of immigration policy that went back to Labour, and that this was not this government's fault, this was a continuity of governments. Do you accept any responsibility from a Labour perspective?
Yes. There's been a nasty race to the bottom. It's been about numbers. It's been about deportations. And I'm afraid my party has also played some role in that. I think it's got more acute since a hostile environment, but this is a long story. And let me just be clear, the link between this country and the Caribbean did not begin in 1948 with the Windrush. All of us here of Caribbean descent are in this country and have this relationship in this country because our descendants were removed from Africa, taken across the Atlantic and put in the Caribbean. So, and let's be absolutely clear, the wealth of this country was on the back of that labour. That is why it is such a scandal, frankly, that we now have to, and we were made British subjects, we were colonised and made British subjects. You cannot then, 70 years after you ask us to come and help rebuild the country, so once again our labour is used, and then send us back across the ocean. It is unacceptable, absolutely unacceptable, and of course people should be angry.
David Goodhart, why did it happen from your perspective? Because of legitimate public concern?
I can see why people are angry, and a terrible mistake has been made, and I think the Home Office is culpable. It's admitted as much. I mean, it should have foreseen the fact that there were some historical groups who were legitimately here but would find it very difficult to prove that. And they should have been more proactive in looking out for that. And also, when the cases started piling up, they should have seen a pattern and reacted quicker. That's clear. But there is a broader historical context, which is about moving from... We have had very high levels of immigration in this country. About 4 million people have come to live here permanently just in the last 15 years. There is a national consensus. There is a consensus amongst ethnic minority Britons too, that those numbers have been too high and we should bear down on them and bring them down somewhat.
So this was low-hanging fruit, wasn't it?
And we should also control the system more. We have moved from a very laissez-faire immigration system to a much more controlled one. And some people have unfairly got caught up in the net of that greater control. And we have also been trying to bear down on the much higher levels of illegal immigration.
But was it unfair or was it deliberate? Because what it looks like is that this was low-hanging fruit. No. These were easy people to get rid of, to get deportations up, to get immigration numbers down.
I think it was a lack of historical memory in the department. It was a tick box culture. There clearly had been some brutal behaviour on the part of some officials. But the overall reason why, as David said, that the border has had to come in is because it is very, very difficult to deport people in this country. We deported only 6,000 people against their will who were not offenders last year. That is a very small number. So governments have thought the way to bear down on illegal immigration is to make it more uncomfortable, more difficult for illegal immigrants to survive by making people prove their status if they want to rent a flat or buy a car or whatever. And that there is a
it's nonsense. It's nonsense because everywhere in the world when governments bear down, all you do is you drive people underground, you drive people into poverty, and you create a class of undocumented people. That's what it does. I'm sorry, but David is an example of someone who does not have to deal with the consequences of this pernicious policy. Never exposed to it, apparently an expert on it, but has never seen it face up.
No, that is not true. You
don't know what you're talking about.
That is unfair.
He doesn't know what he's talking about.
We have nearly 1 million, it's estimated we have about 1 million illegal immigrants in this country. Illegal immigration is a great scourge, people who work in sort of semi-slavery conditions, and it's a scourge that particularly affects ethnic minorities in inner city Britain. It is completely legitimate to try and bear down on it. It is true that somebody like me does not have to prove their status. And it should be the case that somebody like me should have to prove my status.
You were trying to get in there, weren't you?
I came in 1961. I've paid my taxes. Now I've been working in the same school for the last 15 years. And it came a point where I became an issue when my HR was changed to Islington. They found that I didn't have a biometric card to work. So I was greeted by a member from HR telling me that I have no rights to work. I was illegal. I shouldn't have the right to work. And I lost my job. I don't know how this could be what you're saying is the right way. I mean,
that was just a mistake.
Yeah, but no, I don't believe that. Yeah. Mistakes are not made with people's lives. Yeah. People's lives you're talking about here. Yeah. Mistakes, I'm sorry, that's not what I'm here for.
Why?
So you think it was deliberate? I mean, it was a mistake.
I think people do think it's deliberate. That's the whole point, isn't it?
And I think
there's no evidence.
But the idea that it's due to a lack of historical memory in itself is a choice. We choose not to educate the masses about the historical links between ourselves and the Commonwealth, and that in itself is going to foster, ignorance about why we're in this place at the moment. If we don't remember or we don't tell people what's going on.
Let me bring in Cliff here. You also served in the services, didn't you?
Questions now that need to be asked
is how did we get into this mess in the first place? I know some people saying there's a conspiracy theory, others are saying the other seed theory. But what we should be asking ourselves, how do we right this? How do we get out of it? How do we make matters better?
Well, the government says it's done it. That's why they're not here tonight.
But governments, whether it's be Conservative or Labour, I've lived here for 60-odd years, and this is not a problem that has been festered on the one government that we've had.
But, you know, there will be people at home watching this going, hang on a minute, I saw the Home Secretary last night saying, you're all going to get British passports. Your children are all going to get British passports. What are you still complaining about?
The question will be, when will this happen? Will it happen? Government, Labour government, Conservative government, the coalition government, they've all remembered the promise that the coalition, a member of the coalition made about student loan. Now, when will it happen? When will it happen? Yeah,
just briefly.
In 60 years that I have, over 60 years I've lived here, Mr. Lammy, and I have had promises and promises and promises. Many of them, different government, many of them have never been acted on. So what we should want to know now, because you said, is people's lives. Let us put these people's lives back on track and take it off hold that it's in at the moment.
Let me just briefly bring in George Ruddock at the back here. From the
I think, I know that they've said they'll make changes now, but I think what needs to be done and keep an eye on is 170,000 signatures signed for that petition, and it's still growing. I think they should be thinking about doing an investigation into the whole debacle, and also maybe consider taking it to make it become an act of Parliament.
OK, let's pause it there for a second, because we have a report from Simeon Brown in Jamaica, where Britain is recruiting nurses right now to alleviate NHS shortages. History is repeating itself, but Jamaicans say it's at their expense.
At morning worship in Kingston's Christ Church, Britain's colonial influence is omnipresent.
We here are members of the Anglican Church, and that was the official church of Jamaica originally when Britain was, in charge.
In Jamaica, Britain's gift of religion remains, but so does the hangover of what they were given in return.
During the sugar heydays, we created the wealth that was Britain at that time.
In the 1940s, they needed nurses, they needed people to come and drive the buses. The public transport was manned by Caribbean people.
From forced labour to migrant labourers, today's sermon is on the week's urgent news.
The Windrush Generation, many have been treated as illegal immigrants under new policy.
In this congregation, there's anger over Britain's perceived disrespect towards a relationship with the Caribbean that only goes one way.
You took us from a country and brought us here, enslave us, work us out to nothing, give us nothing, we get no land, right? Become squatters, in the land that you brought us in.
Quite a sad situation.
British unfairness is the word from this Minister of Religion, and Jamaica's Minister of Health says Britain continues to take from Jamaica by tapping its most important resource, skilled workers like nurses.
We have given a lot and have felt that we have not gotten back in return a sort of commensurate level of benefits. And a manifestation of that clearly has come out in terms of the Windrush issue.
At University Hospital of the West Indies, if you thought Britain's need for Caribbean labour was in the past, then on this ICU ward, there's a sense of déjà vu.
History is repeating itself because so many of our nurses go, they give their skills, they give their young years. When you're young and you have your vibrancy, they give that to the motherland or the US or wherever.
I graduated in 2008 and my batch was about 80 plus nurses, and I only know of about 4 persons who remain in Jamaica.
Jamaica's nurses have been targeted by recruiters from Britain to alleviate the shortage of NHS nurses, but it's perpetuating a crisis here. Last week, the government announced a nursing partnership with Jamaica, but it will mean Britain's so-called hostile environment will need to end.
There is a significant opportunity that could be had that could be mutually beneficial, but it would depend on the UK adjusting their rules, adjusting their immigration laws, and providing the opportunity.
70 years on from the Windrush, and Britain is again leaning on its former colonies, who want a more reciprocal relationship post-Brexit, and believe Britain has forgotten their contribution.
Well, also joining me now from Jamaica is immigration lawyer Jennifer Howson, who's worked on many cases here and there. Just give us a sense of the scale of the problem. How many people do you think are in Jamaica, in limbo?
Right, good afternoon. The difficulty is that the numbers are quite difficult for someone to put a number to it. The numbers are difficult to gauge. What I can say is that I deal with at least 10 cases a year where people have come from the UK, from the Windrush generation, people in the over 55 who have come to Jamaica and been stranded here. Some have been lucky, others not so. So just for myself, and I'm only just one person doing this, a lot of times we get persons who have had their relatives in the UK dealing with the matter. But certainly I can attest to at least a dozen cases a year that this has happened to, and that it may sound low, but it is actually extraordinarily high in and of itself. So taken together, when you look at the figures, we don't necessarily have statistics, data that is formal. We have no formal data. But what I can say is we hear the numbers going out there, and the 50,000 that is being spoken of, some of those people are certainly persons who've come out of that into Jamaica.
Jennifer Howson, thank you very much indeed. Well, we have some nurses from Jamaica and the Caribbean in our audience tonight. Cheryl Gregory, let me come to you. I mean, when you think about what has happened, how do you feel about Britain going to recruit nurses in Jamaica today?
In fact, it seems as if we've made full circle to what happened in post-1948, where nurses were invited here to build the new NHS. My concern is when we recruit nurses from the Caribbean, quite often the recruitees will be the most skilled. Who are going to be looking after the patients in the Caribbean when they're depleted of the cream of the crop?
How about you? What do you think?
It might be a good thing for the nurses coming, but as I'm thinking about here, when they do come here, would they be part of the system? They will be possibly encouraged by coming because of the financial status, but would they be given, it would be a Jamaican passport?
Will they get a British passport? Yeah. It's the question all over again, isn't it? Let me come to Shankia Stewart, because what we've been saying tonight is that this is not just about the Windrush generation. Now, Shankia, you are also, well, you're facing deportation right now.
Yes, I am. I've been in the UK since I was 12, and I came to join my dad, who was heavily depressed at the time while making the application. Home Office refused me on certain grounds. When I found out about my immigration around age 18 and started to find it, they didn't deem it, my dad's sickness, as what you call it now, a compassionate to grant me my stay here. I am now 28. And I'm still fighting it. About a couple of weeks ago,
unable to go to university?
Unable to go to university.
Were you able to work?
Not properly or anything like that.
So you came here as a child?
Yes, I did.
You can't do anything?
I can't do anything, and I've lived here for most of my life. There's a rule in the Home Office, if you've been here half of your life, between 18 and 25, they will give you compassionate leave. Well, the caseworker told me I missed that by 11 months. 11 months. They rejected my application on 11 months. 11 months.
And you weren't able to go to your own mother's funeral?
No, my mom died last year. Sorry. In Jamaica. I'm sorry, oh my God. And I couldn't go because I just made another application of £2,000 odd. And I wasn't able to go to my mom's funeral. because my application was in the Home Office, which they took 1 year to send back to me.
And now, when did you get the deportation letter?
About 2 weeks ago, and they gave me 14 days to appeal.
And your dad is still with us?
My dad is still with us, and...
But he lives here?
He lives here,
And
yeah.
they're sending you there?
Yeah, they said that my dad can visit me in Jamaica, and they're not taking his illness into consideration.
This is not covered by what Amber Rudd
And
said
there's more of us.
in the House of Commons, and there are more of them.
Sorry.
So, Jacob Rees-Mogg, do you think cases like this are as compassionate? Do they also deserve action?
They need humane treatment. You need in any system a degree of discretion so that obvious injustices can be avoided. And somebody who has lived in this country from the age of 12 to 28, 16 years out of 28 years, it seems to me obviously is a case where compassion should be exercised. And this is where political leadership ought to be given to the Home Office. We have to have an immigration system. We have to decide who can come and who can't. But cases like this one are just so unfair and sad and wrong, because if the Home Office had deported somebody after a year or something, that's different. But somebody who spent more than half their life in the country, doesn't that tell you that the Home Office hasn't managed...
And you're surprised again by that kind of story?
I'm less surprised by this kind of story. I think we've seen more of this, unfortunately. We have seen elderly ladies who've lived in the country for a very long time, grandmothers who suddenly are going to be deported, and this gets into the news. And it's where discretion is important, because we need a system that allows the humanity of individuals to be taken into account, is not just a bureaucratic tick-box system. I think the problem with the Home Office is that is how it operates, and that's why you got into the Windrush problem, and the problem for other Commonwealth citizens, as I mentioned, the lady who came to see me was from Australia, because it doesn't take into account the discretion and the compassion of individuals.
Just briefly, David Lammy, if you will, go on.
I'm just slightly frustrated with this emphasis on the Home Office, as if it's some sort of huge power that has nothing to do with the government of the day. Just ask the people in this room about the fees alone. The general public have no idea of the thousands and thousands of pounds it costs to make these applications every year. There's no other area of public life, when you apply for a driving licence, that requires huge fees for poor people, that's going on every single day in our country.
OK, thank you for that. I mean, as we've seen, Britain's relationship with migration has often been a troubled one. Michael Crick reports now on how we went from open arms for Commonwealth migrants to targets in the tens of thousands and a hostile environment.
The flow began after the war.
They came to work in British hospitals and on the buses. Indeed, the Post-War Nationality Act, in theory entitled 800 million people across the empire, a quarter of the world's population, to come here. Tens of thousands did so, often invited. So, in 1962, Macmillan's Conservatives set new rules for Commonwealth immigrants.
Rule 1. The immigrant must have a job to come to.
But this ITN film from a street in Smethwick showed the growing tension.
It's here that the whites have banded together and look as though they'll persuade the Conservative-controlled council to halt the coloured invasion. Up to 6 years ago, Marshall Street was all white, like the ads say, shining white. Then, in 1958, a Jamaican, Mr. St. Aubyn Henry, moved in at number 85. In 1960, the old lady at number 37 across the road died.
Houses owned by whites were bought by blacks and Asians.
And always it's coloured people who move in, whites who move out.
Things that we've seen them do in the streets as regards of emptying the chambers in the gutter. They used to put the children on the pavement to do the business.
The white people in this street say that the West Indians are unsanitary in their habits. True?
That's a lie. As whites marched against immigration, Enoch Powell delivered his rivers of blood speech.
We must be mad. Literally mad.
The Wilson Labour government imposed tougher curbs against Kenyan Asians, despite protests.
It has always been known that British government is fair and just,
It appears at the moment that all the fairness and justice which they have always promoted has completely vanished.
I want to see that the whole Kampala street is not full of Indians.
When Idi Amin threw the Asians out of Uganda, the Tory Heath government took in 30,000 to Britain. But for 3 decades after that, immigration wasn't really a big political issue, till the numbers shot up under New Labour.
If we take the 50,000 a year, the 15,000 a year in that 50-year post-war period, it comes out on average of 30,000 a year, all right? That then, under Tony Blair, becomes, within a decade, nearly 300,000 a year, nearly 10 times what the post-war average had been.
Farage's party seized on the issue, paving the road to Brexit.
Absolutely.
And it was a huge mistake for Labour to dismiss public concerns, says a man who advised 2 Labour PMs.
This not listening, which I think was quite understandable in the Labour Party in the 60s and 70s, but later was not. It was a serious political mistake by the Liberal leadership of the Labour Party.
This is a Labour mug from the 2015 election, which caused leader Ed Miliband huge grief with his party. Labour did talk tough for a while, making controls one of their 5 pledges. And as David Cameron tried to cut net migration to tens of thousands, Vince Cable threatened to quit the coalition over foreign students. Immigration's been an issue of tensions and contradictions, which mainstream politicians have often avoided. Maybe no more.
Well, our underlying question tonight has been whether the Windrush scandal has been a one-off mistake or whether it's really opened the lid on something much deeper. Let me bring in Satbir Singh from the Joint Council for the Welfare of Immigrants on the back row there. I mean, how many other cases are there that aren't covered by Amber Rudd's dispensation yesterday that would break people's hearts?
There are so many untold stories. We see it every day. Thousands of people every day have their lives ruined by a policy that, and with all respect to David in the front there, isn't about managing migration like any other policy area. It's about looking tough on migration, whatever the cost, whatever the evidence says. We have people who are separated from their families, people who die in detention centres. I think whatever people's opinion is on immigration, the British public over the last couple of weeks have been, quite frankly, shocked by what immigration control means. People don't want to see how the sausages are made, and the truth is coming out now.
Ahmed Rafat, let me bring you in, because you're not from a Commonwealth country, from Egypt.
No. Yes, I am.
What's your situation?
Well, the last job was trying to do a checkup on me, and the Home Office sent it back negative. I mean, it's a reference number. You put it in the computer, will bring everything on me. I shouldn't be sacked. I shouldn't have been sacked.
You were sacked from your job?
Been sacked
because of the hostile environment policy?
The Home Office asked my employee to sack me on the spot.
And what's your immigration status?
I've got indefinite to remain since 1981.
So it was just a screw up?
Well, the Home Office said now that it's an error and they will correct it. But unfortunately, I just yesterday been in an interview. They refused to take me because they need to see something clear as the government asked them. A card, a biometric card, or the British citizen. Or
and you won't get any compensation under this new scheme. Let me come to Katja Woodlack, because you're looking forward with the concerns of all the EU migrants who are here and worried about what happens after Brexit.
Yeah, exactly. The way that people are treated that come legally in this country and have been British subjects as well is kind of worrying for EU migrants, especially post-Brexit. The Home Office and the hostile environment since 2012 have tweaked the rules 57 times, which means every time they tweak the rules, some people are falling through the cracks. What we're doing in the 3 million for protecting the rights of 3.6 million EU nationals post-Brexit is to make sure that we have a status protected for life by an independent court after 8 years, because at the moment it's not for life, it's only for 8 years under the European Court of Justice. And with everything happening at the moment, we're not feeling secured.
David Goodhart, let me come to you. I mean, much of your argument is based on what British people think about immigration.
Yeah.
Do you feel you may have actually misjudged that at all?
No, not at all. I mean, I know lots of Caribbean people. They have long complained to me about the vast number of East Europeans who've been coming in recent years. There is a very broad consensus that we need to bring the numbers down. Obviously, we need to do it in a humane way, and then clearly, I mean, I think we're in danger here of describing exceptional cases as the norm. There clearly are far too many of them, and I can understand...
So you're saying that African Caribbeans,
cases,
like our audience here, have got a problem with Eastern Europeans?
One thing
Can I just check that with the audience? Has anybody here got a problem with Eastern European immigration?
No.
Have you heard that from people around you?
Well, okay. Let me just hit back. Let me just reply to David Lammy and the gentleman in the back row. The idea that this is about racism, it is about discriminating against black people. Well, can I just remind you that the three main groups that are deported from this country are all white European countries. Romania, Albania and Poland are the top three groups of deportation. There is no African or Caribbean country in the top 5. Now, in the long run, all of this will be solved because in 10 or 15 years' time, we will all have ID cards or some kind of digital identity. So we will not have these anomalous cases. And that is what is going to happen with the Europeans. They are going to have a unique digital identity, the 3 million. And that'll be a trial run, I think, for the rest of us as well. And I think we can sort these things out.
Is he right, Jacob Rees-Mogg?
I could not be more strongly opposed to identity cards, and I think the problem with the hostile environment is that it's fundamentally un-British. A British citizen going lawfully about his or her business ought not to have to prove why he or she is doing what he or she is doing. That's been one of our most ancient and historic liberties, and we ought not to give that up. And the issue here is, in fact, the competence of our border controls. The reason things have been handed to employers, to landlords, to banks, is because we haven't actually known who is in the country legally and illegally. And that goes back to the administration
That's why
within...
we need ID cards,
ID
Jacob.
cards change the relationship between the individual and the state, and they mean that we would all have to prove who we were the whole time.
I just want to give the last word in this section of the discussion to the man we first highlighted on Channel 4 News, Anthony Bryan, who's here. I mean, how are you feeling tonight after listening to this discussion and about what the Home Secretary said yesterday?
Well, I'm still baffled by the whole thing because it seems like in this audience we still can't pick out the bad sheep in the room. And I'm just still lost with all this. I can't even clear my head because...
You don't feel reassured, that's clear.
Nowhere at all.
Nowhere at all.
Nowhere at all. Remember, I've been going to just two and a half years. They're sending me around all over the place to look for files where they knew I couldn't find.
That's right.
You know, so...
He's been here for 52 years. I'm his son. I'm born here. I'm been here for 33 years. My dad has paid his taxes. And like people say that it's a unique case. The gentleman in front said that there's 3 countries that they deport back to. But were those countries invited here? We were invited here. I want you to understand that. That's a strong case. We were invited here and now we're being told, go home. Go home to where?
Well, thank you all very much indeed for now. I'm going to pause it there because, in fact, that's all for here on the programme, but you can continue watching this debate because we're going to carry on for the next 20 minutes or so on channel4.com/news, so do go to the website. After the break, John will have the rest of the day's news, but from everyone here at the Emmanuel Centre in Westminster for now, thank you for watching. Right, so we can carry on now. Are we on? We're streaming. I'm hoping we're still live. I want to come to the back row because Marcia Longden, you had your hand up, and I'm sorry I didn't have time to get to you then. What were you going to say?
I was going to say, I'm an immigration lawyer. I've been an immigration lawyer for 20 years, and this is the most appalling thing that I have seen in my 20-year career. So, to your point, it is a catastrophe, and it is something that needs to get fixed. Your story, unfortunately, it happens literally weekly, and it happens on a regular basis, and it is awful. And I think one of the things that I wanted to say as well was that
You can say it. You're still live on the internet.
Sorry.
It's fine.
Is Amber Rudd going to backdate people's rights to British citizenship? She talks about giving them a passport, but is she going to recognise that they were entitled to that passport in 1952 or in 1962? Saying that she's going to give it to them now is, you know, it's good and it's positive, but is she going to look and backdate that? In relation to the compensation elements of things, how is she going to quantify that? How is she going to quantify the emotional distress and damage that so many people have gone through? And I think those are the details that people need to know about.
Jacob and David, I don't know whether you're all surprised to be waiting. If you need to go, I do understand.
I'm going to stay.
Thank you very much indeed for being with us. But if you can stay. Thank you, Jacob. Who else wants to come in on yes?
So I think, just referring to what you're saying about this sort of not relating to racism in the UK, I would sort of contest that, I reckon. If you think the hostile environment policy was, you know, as you put it, created in response to people's societal concerns about immigration in the UK, who are the visible immigrants to the UK? They're not necessarily people who are from Eastern European backgrounds, they're people who look like us. You know, we're the people who people see on the streets and they're like, oh, they're taking over. It's not going to be the white people. So I don't really understand how you could not make the connection between racism.
I do understand that, and I think it is one of the problems. You know, everybody has agreed we want to minimise illegal immigration. Well, almost everybody wants to do that. And I accept there is a problem. I mean, given how hard it is, because we are actually a very liberal country, it is very hard to deport people. Therefore, governments have said, both Labour and Tory governments have said, right, we need to make life uncomfortable for people who are illegally, so they will self-deport. Now, I absolutely accept there is a problem here in that, you know, as David pointed out earlier, if you have to, you know, having to prove your status is going to be mainly people who do not look or sound like members of the ethnic majority, who are going to be mainly the people who will be asked. Now, and that is a problem. I absolutely accept that. And that is why everybody, you know, in the NHS, in the various bureaucracies, needs to check everybody, including me, so that there is equal status of status proof, as it were. I mean, that is the only way in which we can combine fairness with bearing down on illegal immigration.
But the trouble I always have with this discussion is that when you talk about illegal immigration in that sort of abstract sense, you're not. This was an illegal immigrant who had to self-deport. Yeah. She's called Marva Dorman. You know, she's not an argument. She's a person, and she had a baby, and she had to self-deport because her choice was to be deported, and if she'd been deported, it would have been that much harder to challenge her immigration status. Yeah. She had to self-deport because she wasn't married at the time.
There are all sorts of hard and exceptional cases.
But that's not exceptional, that's routine.
Are you saying we should just forget about illegal immigration?
I'm saying that the argument around illegal immigration is carried out in this sort of rather sterile atmosphere in which you talk about illegal immigrants as if they're not people. That is typical.
It's actually a fix, David, because your emphasis is on illegal immigration.
Yeah.
This is a conversation about immigration. It's about people who are migrants to this country. Many of them are legal. You talk about people being deported from Eastern Europe. The vast majority of them have come through the EU. They're here legally. You might not want them here, but they're here legally. So this isn't about illegal immigration. This is legal immigration.
That's what the hostile environment is about, illegal immigration. I mean, is it clear that the Windrush case
David,
is
you've
about...
not been listening. The hostile environment is about persecuting people who have a right to be here. That's what it's about.
No, I completely
That's how it's been practiced.
I completely disagree.
Charmaine Lovegrove, you want to come in?
I'm disagreeing. I am listening.
I mean, the thing is that what you're forgetting also is that this hostile environment also transcends to second, third, fourth generation. And I work in publishing, 0.2% are people of colour. This transcends in every area of our cultural life, in our landscape, outside of just like when you're talking about illegal, our grandparents weren't illegal. They were absolutely here legally because, as David said, because, as David said, because of the slave trade, because of the Commonwealth. And now we are seeing that we are treated differently as the white Commonwealth to the brown Commonwealth. And the way in which that's that transcends itself in daily you're shaking your head.
Yeah, I am. You know, the biggest single group.
You're shaking your head at me about this. No, you don't get to do that, and I'll tell you why you don't get to do that.
I'm not allowed to disagree.
No, because we fight on a daily basis for our equality as second, third, and fourth generation. So this racism is there every single day. And to tell me, you're talking about
I'm not saying there is not racism in this country. Well, but
yes,
what I would like to point out...
Just let him answer.
I would like to point out the biggest single group of people who are turned away at the border are Americans. You know, the idea that the Home Office is out to deport black people because somehow they don't like black people isn't simply not
back
true.
To Jamaica? We've been seeing planes going back to Jamaica for years.
Yeah.
We've been watching this happening for years. This is no surprise.
Jamaicans, I don't think, even get into the top 10 of countries that are deported.
It doesn't mean it's not a problem. We're here today because it's a problem.
The measure is not deportation. You've created that measure. The measure is being detained. The measure is not being able to work. Yeah. The measure is not getting a pension. The measure is the NHS. It's not solely deportation, David. And when she says the Commonwealth, what she really means is, where are the Australians in this room? Where are the Canadians? Yes. Where are the New Zealanders?
Well, where are the Indians? Where are the Hindu or Sikh Indians?
All right, let's just pause. I don't want David Goodhart to become the focus of the debate, just for now. I want to bring in Vince McBean, who has also served in the armed forces.
This is a Windrush.
Hang on. Just hang on, because we are still, we're still recording and we're still going out live on the internet. Vince McBean, you were trying to get in earlier. What point do you want to make?
Well, there's a couple of points. There was an impact assessment done to ascertain which group the measures taken by the government, which group was going to affect. And mysteriously, it wasn't signed off, but yet the policies have been implemented. You have somebody like myself who's been in the forces. We've been medically discharged because I got injured on active duty. And then I then see, through a treaty, people from Europe who we fought against can now come over here and benefit from all the hard work that we've put in. My brother has had 2 applications turned down, cannot come into this country. Yet, we was a British colony, you know. So how does all that weigh up? And what are we meant to think when we contributed so much and this is the return?
How did it weigh up for you? I mean, did that mean that you were pro-Brexit because of that? Or because that's what happens to some people, wasn't it?
Absolutely.
For a lot of Commonwealth.
Well, the irony of it all, I had to pay £90 to get naturalised, to get the British passport. That's after I got injured on active service. So these are, when I hear about, you know, compassionate and, you know, these are just small, these issues are just one-offs and so forth. It's nowhere near the real issue that we are going through, because day on day, we have to fight our corner.
Marva, you wanted to speak again.
Yes, because the gentleman was saying about being illegal immigrants. I wasn't illegal when I wasn't an illegal immigrant when I was told to leave. I had a baby who born at 11 weeks, 6 days early. All I was doing was caring for my child. But when I put in my application, I was told to go. So it's
because
not
you'd
about,
missed college?
Yes, because I missed college.
Because you were here on a student visa?
And nobody
so they declared you illegal, effectively?
Nobody had took that into consideration. I get there in Jamaica, I had nowhere to stay. I was just standing outside thinking, where am I going to sleep tonight? So they don't get to say who is legal and who is legal, where you stay and where you don't. Because sending you back to Jamaica, where are you going to live? I was offered £2,000 to go. But if I had took that £2,000, me or my child wouldn't be back here. My husband has to work double shift 7 days a week to get us back here. And we still have to pay £1,012 to naturalize my child. Yes. And he was born here.
Story where you have kids getting naturalized and their parents has to pay that amount of money and they're British citizen with British birth certificate in their country. It's not fair at all, and nobody's speaking up. Nobody's speaking up, and Home Office talk about doing things the right way. They're not doing things the right way, actually. They're burdening a little child who was born here, parent, to pay $1,200. That's unfair.
You see, what's striking to me about this is that we didn't have to try very hard to put this audience together. It was very, very easy to find an audience of people who had either been victims of injustice or knew people. And that suggests that this problem is right there, right under our noses.
Impact assessment.
Something trying to...
I think we should avoid trying to get into this trap that David at the front is trying to lead us down, where we divide ourselves between people of colour who are opposed to Europeans, Europeans who are worried about people of colour who come over here, because ultimately we're all subject at the end of the day, to the same Home Office, which is not taking the issue of irregular migration seriously. It's taking the issue of the Tories looking tougher than UKIP seriously. And the Chief Inspector of Borders himself, in his reports, has said that the hostile environment policies are likely to not lead to significant increases in the number of voluntary departures. He said that there are no measures in place to monitor their effect, so the Home Office has no intention of monitoring whether these measures are working. They're there to look tough, and it's 8 years later, and you've got people who honestly didn't expect that they'd still be in government, having to deal with the consequences of the mess that they put in place 8 years ago.
Katja?
This is just politics. I mean, this is just politics.
Agree with said there, because I don't think it's helping anybody by dividing people by nationality, race and things like that. We all subject to that. Even people that came here legally, status, you change all the time. You can be legally here. I do a lot of overseas recruitment, like I work for a union. We recruit overseas nurses. And when they come, they've got a visa. Then sometimes they need to review their visa. Then they come here legally. But sometimes it could happen that the status change between legal, illegal, and things like that. Thinking that a status is just static is complete nonsense, you know. And we need to stop thinking. It's the same for Europeans. At the same time, a lot of European countries don't allow dual nationality. A lot of Spanish can't have dual nationality. Then what do you want them to do? To be able to stay here under status, things will change and they will be deported. It's not a simple thing. We need to unite around that. There's no, we need to be stronger and work together.
David Lammy, do you think there is a sense in which, as more of these stories come to light now, and there's an atmosphere, there's an appetite in some of the media, not all the media, to air these stories, that we will start to perhaps change the tone of the conversation on immigration?
I'm hopeful. Look, I've been hopeful before. I thought after Grenfell we might change the tone on conversations around justice and housing, and I'm not sure it has. But I think the British public have not seen the reality of some of this policy. They've not seen the reality of some of the theory that we're hearing from David. So there is no area of public life for David, or indeed for where I pay £1,200 to the state for an act. Doesn't arise in my life. And I think the British public are hearing these sorts of fees, this extortionate money for people who haven't got a lot of money. And there are big questions about, is that really fair? Never mind the detaining and the deport. So I hope it leads to and it's not that, of course you have to control your borders. You can't have open borders. We all accept that. Of course you need to think hard about who is illegal. But what we're hearing is that this is a ramping up of rhetoric, and I believe it's about, frankly, a pandering to a very hard right rhetoric in this country, and it's asking a whole load of people to police people out of their lives. That's what, and the Windrush, I think, because in a sense, in terms of modern immigration, we are, as West Indian, Caribbean people, the oldest community. People are beginning to see through our lens what is happening to a wider group of people. That's my hope.
I don't want to make this too party political, but is there any hope being offered by your party, though? Your party is sort of also, mired in a scandal over how it deals with anti-Semitism. Yes. Does it provoke any confidence when it comes to how it would deal differently with immigrants, or look at immigrant communities differently?
Well,
when you admit yourself that New Labour started down a lot of this path.
We currently have a leader, we have a shadow Home Secretary, and people like me that voted against the act that led us to this place. We have not heard out of the Labour Party that kind of tough on control immigration. I was very disappointed with those silly mugs that Ed Miliband put out 2-3 years ago. So the rhetoric at least has changed. But let me be clear, where I disagree with David, there's been this tendency on the right to divorce immigration from race. Oh, they're two separate things. Race, we're all liberal now. We're all Notting Hill. We all get on. We've got black friends. We've got Caribbean. Let's get David Lammy to do a review on race. Race and immigration go hand in hand. And that's what this demonstrates, as far as I'm concerned. We've got to be absolutely clear about it.
Absolutely not. One of the great things about the last 10 years has been our ability to separate out immigration and issues of racial justice, partly because of the great inflow after 2004 from Eastern Europe. And I think that has improved the debate. It is not that they are two separate issues. And I think we are, we are, one of the bigger issues here is that we have historically been a very low documentation society. We've never been, as Jacob was saying, it's not part of our tradition to have ID cards and so on. And we are gradually, crabwise, moving towards being a much more documented society, partly because of anxieties that all ethnic groups share about the social fluidity, about not knowing whether people have these entitlements or not. So as I said earlier, in 10 years' time, it'll be fine. But I think you're far too pessimistic about race in this country. We have a huge and growing multi-ethnic middle class. We have a huge and growing mixed race population, the biggest proportionately in Europe. Are these not success stories as well?
David, I'm saying racism is persistent. I'm not saying it doesn't improve.
I'm not saying it's going away.
You had your hand up. You wanted to come in.
Yeah, you're saying about documentation. Is that why the government shredded the majority of our documents?
Our history.
It's not your history.
They shredded it.
You would
They
not
shredded
have.
them.
You would
What
not
do you mean
have
it's
had
not
to,
their history?
Because they would not have had to fill in those cards anyway. As people who had come here from 48 to 62, they were not regarded as aliens. The people who filled in those cards were aliens in the terminology of the time. So you would not have filled in those cards. And even if you had, it would not have proved your permanent status here. It's a complete red herring. The whole card, it's a complete red herring.
Those cards was leading up to something. So why did they destroy them? In this day and age, why did they destroy those cards?
You would not have filled in one of those cards.
Excuse me, what do you mean by aliens?
Because you weren't aliens. Because you were assumed to be, you were a British citizen. Oh. And that was the problem. Of course I accept you're British citizen. I'm saying there was a historic mistake. In 1971,
how did we lose
it? All given, not all of you here, but Caribbeans and indeed everybody else, people from other Commonwealth countries, there was a blanket decision. Everybody who had been here up until 1971 was given indefinite leave to remain. The problem was, because we then lived in a very low documentation society, lots of people, particularly the Windrush people, never got the documentation to then prove it.
Okay.
So that when the hostile environment comes well, it actually started under Labour in the late 90s and early 2000s, that, we then become a more documented society, and lots of people are snared in this net. They don't have the ability to prove the reality, which is that they are here legitimately, but they can't prove it.
We're coming to the end now. I just want to hear from the people who feel they haven't had a chance yet. Yes, lady there.
I'm sorry to hear about this documentation, that really don't document things. Yet still 18,000 documents were found from the Mau Mau fighting. Okay? Now, I'm dealing now with the Commonwealth citizens that came here. Windrush, they were passengers, were not invited here. They came here because there was a need. They could see a labour gap. In the 50s, when it was debated in Parliament that about getting labour here, and the King also pointed out the shortage of skilled labour here, we were invited, my parents were invited here. I came here in 57, and my dad pointed out, and this is why someone mentioned about conspiracy theory, he says, don't be too comfortable here, because there will come a time where you'll all be taken off the streets and be deported. All right? So all my life, I've waited for that to happen. So I've waited, and my children, who were British, they were born here, so they're British. And I'm saying to them, you are British because you're born here. No way would they accept you back in the Caribbean as Jamaican or Barbadian or West Indians. So when we're talking about the citizenship, it's to define what was debated in Parliament in the 1950s within a hostile environment then, and it's followed through to now. It's only that it was covert. Yes.
Yeah, and David, for you, a hostile environment is new. For many of the people in this room, a hostile environment has been a persistent part of the black story.
Cliff,
it's as simple as that.
Last word, Cliff.
Well, when I came here in the early 50s, it was the time, I lived in Dalston, it was the time, many have mentioned, not in this room tonight, of the no blacks, no dogs, no Irish. And I thought that we had moved forward. Listening to the conversation tonight, I think we blasted well have not moved very far.
Well, on that rather pessimistic note, thank you very much indeed. Thank you all very much indeed for coming, for sharing your stories and for engaging with each other. Thank you, David, as well, for taking on the argument. We're going to leave it there. You can carry on this argument, the Fighting to be British argument, on our social media channels, and this whole programme will be put together to view on YouTube in one lot before long. But until the next time, thank you very much indeed for watching. Bye-bye.